Witness Me by Humble Narrator, Chapter 9, Witness Me 2. Once Itachi had scared away not only the children of Grimm, but Tyrion away, he wasted no time in speaking to his father directly as to what had transpired not long ago. Homusabi Itachi, I hope nothing was I hope everything was cleared up, said Fugaku. Indeed, father. However, I must make haste and leave immediately to finish off one of these band of rogues, said Itachi. Homusabi, I remind you how your brother was exiled due to him choosing to seek petty vengeance, said Fugaku. Of course not, father, though this, however, is but a means to an end of what surely will come back to harm us if not dealt with immediately, said Itachi. How so? Said Fugaku, as his family has had a long history of the man. If it wasn't because he was a huge valued asset for not only being one of the best organic mechanics, but who could possibly know where both Tsunade and Jiraiya went to shortly before establishing the Windmill Warlords? But what was really important was how the once loyal doctor took an interest in wanting to educate Sasuke in the forbidden practices of being an organic mechanic and cyber mechanic for reasons left unknown before Itachi had enough and left the man for dead. You have my permission to take with you as many number of forces you think is necessary in snuffing out that snake man, said Fugaku. I shall not fail you, father, said Itachi as he began to make his way back down to join up with his own personal group of warriors whom he dubbed as the Akatsuki. Homusabi, we're ready to roll, man, said Kisame as he stood up on the passenger seat of Itachi's modified Hummer that had two mounted flamethrowers in the back. Good. Let's make sure that woman with her pets don't do anything to kill Tyrion, at least not until we figure out where Orochimaru is hiding at, said Itachi. While that was true on its own, the main reason for Itachi to go out of his way was because he needed to ensure that Sasuke was alive still. Getting in his truck, Itachi and his men wasted no time in catching up with both Raven and Tyrion. Itachi, how do you want us to take them on? Asked Kisame as he looked at his leader and friend. Without any mercy, said Itachi as Kisame smiled before standing up. Using various hand gestures to the rest of the Katsuki force, no one wasted any time in acting upon their orders. One group consisted an odd trio, as the driver had long blonde hair held in a ponytail and an eye patch over his right eye, while his associate had to replace his missing right hand with a hook instead as he carried a lever action repeater. As for their third associate, he was used as living hood ornament, forced to wear an orange spiral-like mask with a bunch of IV needles connected to form his face towards the back to the blonde driver. Sasori, you ready? Said the blonde-haired man, to which his lancer nodded, pushing down on the pedal with enough force for the car to set itself to auto-drive. Both men leaned out the doors of theirs as they began to fire at a large truck that easily went up in flames and killed anyone trying to survive before hopping back into their seats. As this was happening, Raven in the front lines was leading her forces to catch up and capture Tyrion for her own purpose of recruiting her daughter as she sat on a makeshift throne, which was a large platform on top of a freighter truck that was armed and covered in protection and men ready at her disposal. Mother's Nest, we got some windmill warlords hot on our trail, and our static, came a cut voice on the Mother's Nest radio. Hearing the message, the driver tugged on the horn 3 times to let Raven know that they've got some fighters on her trail. My queen, how shall we deal with the threat behind us? Said the man in the crow mask as Raven turned her head over to see that Itachi and his crew were tearing the group a new one. Not by sitting on our asses. Now get to protecting me already, said Raven angrily as the man in the crow mask nodded before he pulled out a large flare gun from the side of Raven's throne. Shooting up a red flare, the other children of Grimm began to break off and scatter around to gain the upper hand in not only wiping out Tyrion's forces but also Itachi's. Not scared over their wild and reckless driving, Itachi likely slid the wheel of his truck into Kisame's hand before he climbed in the back of his Hummer to one of his mounted flamethrowers, spewing flames on anyone crazy or daring enough to get close to him on his left. He would only switch back to his right after getting nudged once before settling the driver ablaze. Not far behind was a different duo of Itachi Sakatsuki, where they were both riding on a motorcycle. The duo in question was the driver wearing a red cloud face mask and aviator goggles, as there were scars and fresh stitches on his arms, legs, and everywhere on his body, while his lancer remained shirtless except for the grenade belt on his chest and carried a large three-bladed scythe in one hand and a Glock 19 pistol in the other hand. "Take this, you fucking candy driver!" shouted the Lancer as he sliced the tires of a car that it led it to collide to the driver next to him. "Hidan, watch out from a front," growled the driver as his scythe-wielder Lancer barely ducked in time from being shot in the head, with the perched-up gunner shooting a volley of arrows at the duo. "You pecker-biting bastard!" shouted Hidan as he fired 3 bullets at the gunner's chest before biting off the pin and tossing in a frag grenade inside the vehicle, driving off a safe distance from the explosion as the car burst into flames and flipped over and landed itself on top of the back of another truck in front of it, causing more vehicle slaughter in its wake. This didn't go unnoticed, not only by Raven but also Tyrion, as he smiled in delight over the carnage and mayhem he was indirectly causing. "Soon we'll be home and I'll have killed this bird bitch's daughter and Homusabi Itachi," said Tyrion with a mad laugh as he sat in the back seat of a muscle car that was stripped of its windows and mirrors, while his personal driver and Lancer laughed along with him. "The hell are you two laughing about? If we don't do something about getting them off on our trails before the halfway point, that marshal will put a bullet in all of us before we reach our destination," said Tyrion seriously as he kicked the back seat of his driver. Reaching on his tail was Raven, as her frontal force were making quick work on killing all of Tyrion's forces one by one as he stood tall and battle ready. "My queen, I have your sword ready," said the man in the crow mask as he knelt down and presented her usual katana for battle. "No, I refuse to stain this blade with the blood of a spineless little man. Bring me instead a rifle," ordered Raven as her number 2 nodded and went back to rest her sword before snatching away one of the assault rifles her guards on board carried within a cog scope. Peeking down the scope of the assault rifle, Raven tried to concentrate her fire in shooting at Tyrion's car, not to kill the man as of yet, but as a means to intimidate him and show him that no matter how far and how safe he thinks he is, no one will remain out of her reach in these wastelands. As Raven was taking her pot shots far from the back, Itachi and his Akatsuki were really getting hit hard, as eventually by how the children of Grimm were willing to die just to ensure that Raven was safe. "Itachi, we're getting slammed out here," said Kisume as he swung his bat outside his window and his cyclist next to him, the cyclist next to him as they fell and tumbled back. "Keep calm and don't lose your spine," said Itachi, as nothing was going to stop him from killing Orochimaru and saving Sasuke. As they continued to drive head on, things weren't looking that great for Hidan and his driver, as being on a motorcycle left as any easy target. And nothing showed a better example when a different driver with a gunner who fired a volley of arrows had got lucky and fired 3 bolts on Hidan. "Shit, Hidan," said his masked driver before he looked back to see that his Lancer was grabbing a can of spray paint and began to spray over inside his exposed mouth as a means to give him one last edge before going out. "Witness me, Kakuzo," said Hidan, since it amazed him how one of the 3 bolts actually went through his mouth before he began to grab 2 frag grenades of his belt before pulling the pins off. "You idiot, I'm still driving here," exclaimed Kakuzu, as he knew that he was going to be a bonus trophy to his Lancer's fury death here in this vehicular slaughter. "Witness me," shouted Hidan, as this got Sasori and Deidara to look what he's about to accomplish. "Witness him," shouted the duo as the driver honked his horn as Kisame saw this. "Witness him!" shouted Kisame with a giddy smile before at long last he done slammed his fist against two vehicles that had him and his driver sandwiched together before blowing them all straight to Valhalla. "Witnessed!" shouted Kisame in joy as Itachi put his hand up for them both to high five over an epic vehicular slaughter. However, things were about to get more epic and gruesome as the sight alone was enough to excite Deidara. "Oh, what a day! What a glorious first day to my last day," said Deidara as he began to pull out from his back seat a bundle of sticks of dynamite like you would have seen in an old Looney Tunes cartoon with a long wick. "I'm the man who'll shine brighter than the bombs to birth our new world," said Deidara as he was ready to light it before Sasori grabbed his arm back in place. "What are you doing?" demanded Sasori. "We're about to be taken to the gates of Valhalla now, and we'll be doing two more glorious than before," said Deidara as he made the fast pass of the children of Grimm as they approached closer towards Raven's truck. "This is suicide, man," said Sasori in fear as Deidara had his lighter ready to light the fuse before Sasori was going to have it as both men began to wrestle over the lighter. As fortune would have it for those who wanted to die and be rid of this world here, as they had dropped the lighter and landed directly on the dynamite, blasting them both sky high without taking anyone else out. But it did startle Raven enough to only loose her rifle. "Bah, mediocre," said Itachi in disdain as they both continued to drive towards wherever Tyrion was fleeing from. Speaking of, the man was nearing the halfway zone and was starting to get nervous because he knows that the marshal shall be waiting and watching and won't risk exposing them. "I ain't dying on the Fury roads. I ain't dying here in this vehicular slaughter. I ain't dying today," said Tyrion in a panic as he began to crawl out the back window with twin Scorpion submachine guns and began to fire towards anyone and everyone behind him. While Tyrion was struggling to save face and keep himself alive, the truth was that his death was inevitable. His fleet was all but gone, as it was his car and one other truck, and if he wasn't having to deal with the unknown threat that was Raven, who had got the better of him and reminded him what fear was like, it was him worrying about the powerhouse that was Itachi. As he continued to fire bullets all over the place, Tyrion left himself exposed as the marshal had been perched up just far away for him to stay out of sight from everyone and well hidden as he looked at the end of the scope of his anti-material rifle. "Pity," was all the marshal said before he pulled the trigger as the bullet went flying and hit the engine of Tyrion's car, where the vehicle went out of control before it inevitably crashed and turned over. Not quite finished with his duty at hand, the marshal also shot out the other truck driver to leave no loose ends, knowing that his job there was done. This didn't go unnoticed, as the remaining force of Raven's gang began to park around the circle the vehicle for anyone that was alive. Climbing down with her katana in hand, Raven got close to Tyrion's corpse to see that he had died with the back of his head cracked open, as evident by the puddle of blood forming. His neck was snapped off place as he lay flat on his back, where his twin submachine guns lied next to him. Raven was at a loss of words to describe the amount of anger she felt before she heard the roaring sound of Itachi's vehicle coming to a park, before he and Kisame hopped out to be greeted with guns being pointed at them. "You vindictive maniac! You've costed me my one chance of finding my daughter," said Raven with anger. "And your nosy, self-righteous actions cost me my one chance to locate and kill Orochimaru," said Itachi. "Enough of this. I shall personally see to it that you die here today," said Raven as she began to remove her katana from its sheath. "Try as you like, but know that this is where you die," said Itachi as he drawn one of his flame swords from his hip as well. Without hesitation, both combatants lunged at each other and locked with one another. "I'm surprised that your blade of yours hasn't broken up upon impact," said Itachi, as he was normally able to slice a person's weapon in half with ease. "Here's a tip for you. It's 50% the sword itself, the other 50% the swordsmanship," said Raven before she pushed Itachi back off her as she ready to slice her blade upwards. Both Itachi swung his sword down to block the fatal blow before raising his sword up above his head, ready to bring it down. Ducking and rolling around Itachi, Raven swung her katana across his legs, but he managed to not only jump away from the fatal blow, but kick Raven in the chin, knocking her on her back. Get up, I'm actually enjoying myself for once, taunted Itachi as Raven gripped her chin before feeling a tickle of blood running down her lip. Angered over how she was getting bested by someone who meant nothing and stood as a random obstacle in her path, Raven hopped back to her feet and began to swing her sword once more at Itachi, where he blocked it again. However, Raven had shifted her body in closer, step her foot in between Itachi's leg before she elbowed him in the abdomen, by hitting him in the face with the other end of her sword, knocking him down his back. Not as merciless or one to taunt, Raven raised her katana high with intentions of plugging it in Tachi's chest, but he was able to get his bearings in check and rolled out the way before getting back on his feet. However, he was now stuck with the issue that the dirt might have blocked the valves needed to cause the flames to continue fanning on his flamed sword. Let's see that shish kebab of yours stand a chance now, said Raven as she swung her sword down before raising back up towards Itachi's face, but was still able to block it from getting anywhere close towards a fatal blow. I must admit, you survived a lot longer than anyone I faced, said Raven. Agreed, said Itachi, before he slipped his right index finger into a plastic ring that was attached to a wire before yanking it back. Instantly, his sword reignited its flames, and then some as it nearly burned Raven's face as she began to back away a little with her eyes shut. Seeing this as his opening, Hitachi went and plunged his sword into Raven's chest as the flames of his sword continued to burn. With her eyes wide open like her mouth, Hitachi merely gave an apathetic stare before yanking his sword back out so fast that Raven fell to the ground, screaming in a way no one's ever heard of her before, have her screaming as she gripped her freshly burnt and bleeding wound. You bastard! Shuddered the man in the crow mask as he raised the volley gun towards Itachi before Kisame came out of nowhere and swung his bat down to knock out the weapon from his hand before grabbing him by his lower jaw. Stay down, said Kisame before slamming him to the ground. For all those to see, the strength of Itachi's main enforcer is no one to be trifled with. Listen up. From here on, you have one of two choices. Either leave with your lives and die in obscurity in the wasteland, or join me for the time being, and I assure you that you shall all be rewarded more handsomely for a life better fit for those who join the Windmill Warlords, said Itachi. No, came the shaking voice of Raven as she knelt before Itachi while holding her wound. My children will never work for any one man who chooses to remain still in their own ways and in their own time, huffed Raven through gritted teeth. Kill me today if you want, but I assure you that my children will return more stronger and bigger, and I will promise that your homes destructed will be what'll sate my vengeance as I damn you all to hell, said Raven as she spat towards Itachi's direction. Walking towards her, Itachi began to point his sword at Raven's face as both gave their best 1,000-yard stare at one another. You have a point, and have proven yourself a formidable opponent, said Itachi, before turning up the flames on his sword on high once more. As such, I shall not make the same mistake as I've done before and ensure that you and your children die here today, said Itachi, before he went and finally beheaded Raven as Kisame smiled ear to ear. Hell yeah, shouted Kisame as he slammed his bat into the face of the man in the crow mask repeatedly before he and Itachi focused on massacring the frightened survivors to the children of Grimm. As this was going on, the marshal had observed the whole thing before he crawled away from his spot and towards the radio. Lady Salem, Lord Orochimaru, I've got some good news and bad news, said the marshal. Out with it, Watts, said Orochimaru on the other line. I had to put Tyrion down, unfortunately, but on the plus side, we were able to reduce Homosabi's Itachi forces down to him and one other. What shall I do? Said Watts. Invite them in already, said Orochimaru. Yes, sir, said the marshal before he fired a flare into the sky, letting both Itachi and Kisame know that they've been waiting for them. End of chapter 9. Witness Me by humble narrator. Chapter 10, Aquacola from Mortis Terra. Walking their way from around the halls of the Ring of Fire was definitely unsettling, given who things weren't so light, and it was an unknown land of danger for the two blondes. Regardless, neither were ready to lose their nerve yet as they continued to trudge through in order to find the exit to the place. Hey Naruto, Any closer to finding an exit? Asked the still groggy Yang. Not yet, said Naruto as he kept one eye on Yang and another on any potential threats ahead of them. Luckily, they've yet to run into anyone imposing to their escape, as he soon reached a two-way corner, either going left or right. Where do you think we should go? Asked Naruto to Yang. Well, since I lost my left arm here, let's go right, said Yang in order to crack a half-assed joke as Naruto continued to drag her along. Eventually, at the end of their long walk, they were faced with a large twin metal doors. As they began to push through it to see that their path chose led them to a small guarded slave sorting room. Hey, who the hell are you two? Demanded one of the guards, to which the four remaining guards came to arms and began to rush Naruto and Yang. Toss me towards your left, exclaimed Yang. Got it, shouted Naruto as he yeeted Yang forward, except this time she had a small knife in her right hand as she used her shoulder to knock the guard down before stabbing him a good 3 times in the side, just as a different guard came up, ready to swing down a piece of 2x4 towards covered with sharp razors down on Yang. Rolling out of the way, the guard wound up clumming his own associate in the chest as Yang was barely trying to sit up. Once the guard had managed to pull out the bludgeoning blade weapon from his associate's chest, he readied to swing it down Yang's head, who decided to roll over and stab her small knife first in the guard's foot before pulling it out and stabbing it in the back of his calf before she went and cut through, causing the guard to fall over and howl in pain. Naruto, meanwhile, pulled out a small chain and tossed it over her head towards the guard's face, facing him for a quick second before he ran up to deliver a straight kick to his knee, causing the guard to fall over and drop his weapon. Picking up the piece of pipe, Naruto took a batting stance as another guard came rushing at him with a small ball pen hammer as they began to raise it over their head. In a nick of time, Naruto swung his pipe and split the side of the guard's head open before looking down to the still pain guard, where he brought the pipe down over his head. Needless to say, their actions got them the praise and cheers of the slaves as Naruto and Yang got back to their feet and continued to march their way forward, where they finally entered the heart of the Ring of Fire. Swimming through a sea of tortured slaves forced to run this facility, Naruto and Yang kept their heads down low in case of them running into guards patrolling the area, while also trying to not cause attention to anyone watching over in the only watching tower. Speaking of, Orochimaru had gotten up from his chair along with Lady Salem, as she was just as pale-skinned as Orochimaru, except her veins were popping from her around her body as she carried with her various IV bags strapped around her body, as all she wore was a tattered thin black dress, her hair long and white, kept in a high bun decorated with various hairpin accessories. It seems we have some prisoners attempting their escape, said Salem. They matter not. What matters right now is that we bring forth the young Uchiha bastard and use him as leverage to execute Itachi, said Orochimaru as he picked up the intercom mic. Sakura, wherever you are, acquire Sasuke immediately and bring him to the entrance, ordered Orochimaru before Salem put a hand on his shoulder. Think rationally, my love. Should we allow those 2 prisoners their chance to escape, who knows what could happen, said Salem as Orochimaru set his sights on her to try and stop him. Allow me, dear, said Salem, taking the intercom mic from his hand before placing it down before ringing a buzzer next to her chair. Everything all right, my lady and lord? Asked Hazel. Hazel, please be a dear and take care of a pair of scabs we have roaming around the Ring of Fire freely. They must be punished, said Salem. Dead or alive, just say the word, said Hazel. I'll leave that up to you, said Salem with a smile before Hazel made his way outside the door and took out a syringe from within his shirt. Taking the needle, he injected it within his right arm as he felt a sudden rush of rage as the veins in his arms began to pulsate before all feelings subsided upon his high, reaching his peak. Snorting in response to how good he felt, Hazel made his way downstairs and towards one of the many entrances to the Ring of Fire as he searched high and low for Naruto and Yang. Show yourself and come here, and I promise you both you shall live a little longer, shouted Hazel as Naruto and Yang were not that far from him. You don't think he's talking about us, whispered Naruto as they hid behind the slaves working the ring of fire. Shut up, whispered back Yang, only for their cover to be blown when Hazel spotted them. There you are, growled Hazel as he began to approach them menacingly, as he went as far as shoving and knocking slaves over to apprehend Naruto and Yang. Elsewhere, as Naruto and Yang were now fleeing for their lives, Sasuke was busy focusing on escaping the Ring of Fire, which to his accordance was going pretty damn well. While he did have a gun, he much rather caused little attention towards himself as much as possible. Henceforth he was going beast mode with a couple of large knives he managed to pilfer off a few guards. Tell me where you keep the damn armory and auto shop where you're or shop here or your tongue here you tough better, said Sasuke as he pressed his knife into the neck of a guard, who merely responded by hissing at him. In a swift motion, Sasuke split the guard's throat open before tossing their body to the ground. Continuing on his pursuit to leave the ring of fire, he walked the halls till he came up a stairway before he was startled by misfired gunshots. I figured something was going on after Lord Orochimaru had called in his apprentice and got no response from the poor girl. Guess my intuition was right, said the marshal as he held a 9-ring revolver in his hand. You can tell your lord that his apprentice is fine, but also he could go hump a damn feral dog, spat Sasuke as he hid behind the corner of the wall. Trust me, I don't think highly of Lord Orochimaru, even before he wasted this much resources and effort to get your brother over here, and for what, to kill him? Said the marshal. Then why serve him? If you aid me in my escape, I assure you that my brother will reward you handsomely, said Sasuke. Sorry, but loyalty is no match for power, and my loyalty is with Lady Salem, even if she chooses to remain loyal by the side of some has been an organic mechanic with a god complex, said the marshal. Then a pity you are to die here today alongside your lady and lord, said Sasuke, as he had already equipped himself with a handgun and fired 2 blind shots at the marshal, who hid him behind the upper stairs, giving Sasuke a chance to ascend the stairs further below the ring of fire. Unfortunately, it led Sasuke only to 2 stories down, where he found out the floor was flooded, but to his chance regardless. Entering through the door, it was a place where pumps were all over the place, along with a large presence of limbo walkers just minding their own business. Trudging his way through the knee-deep flooded floor, it was only a matter of time before the marshal caught up with Sasuke as he lit up a flare and held it high in one hand and his revolver in the other. Don't even bother trying to escape unless you know how to swim, 'cause at the end of the tunnel is nothing but an even larger pit where we're pumping fresh aqua cola from that damn Martis Terra, shouted the marshal as he continued to pursue to capture Sasuke. Eventually, by the time the marshal did catch up, he was already at the end of the road, since he was but only 10 feet away from the large pit that was flooding and flowing with water that was within his place. What the hell did that little devil do go? Said the marshal as he approached the giant hole in the floor with caution as he began to lower his flare down to get a better view. And did the marshal catch an interesting view of Sasuke holding his breath as he gripped onto one of the larger pumps about 5 feet deep in the water? No way, said the marshal in disbelief as Sasuke began to climb his way back up as the marshal began to fire away at Sasuke, not realizing that bullets plus water equals indefinite inaccuracy with any gun. So it all played out in Sasuke's favor as he submerged from the water and slashed his leg with a knife, causing the marshal to drop his flare and misfire his last bullet. Pulling on the marshal's leg, Sasuke managed to throw the man on his back and began to drag him onto the marshal as they both proceeded to wrestle in the water. Eventually, Sasuke got the upper hand and forced his weight over on the marshal and dunked his head in the water and held him there for a few good minutes. Any grip the marshal would try to grab easily slipped from his wet hands, and standing up was but impossible as Sasuke wasn't about putting his leg on the marshal's bad leg. Nope, it was a simple game of waiting it out before Sasuke was successful in putting an end to the marshal as he choked out his last breath before Sasuke went and kicked him into the indoor abyss. Not fully satisfied, Sasuke went and messed with every one of the mechanisms to force the pumps into overdrive as he intended to flood this place before he escaped. With Naruto and Yang, Hazel was relentless and merciless as slaves were pushed aside or even killed in his way as he hunted down after Naruto and Yang, who were surprised how the man wouldn't flinch or show any signs of slowing down, no matter how many times they hit or stabbed him. "Out of my way!" yelled Hazel as he grabbed a slave by the fused restraints and tossed them into the ring of fire as they screamed of agony can be heard. "Take this, you son of a bitch!" shouted Yang as she brought her small knife out to stab Hazel in the side of his stomach, but the man didn't so much as hiss in pain. Instead, he backhanded Yang in the face with his fist, knocking her to the ground. "Hey!" shouted Naruto as he swung his pipe over into the man's face that he met head on before grabbing the pipe and pulling it and Naruto closer before he tightened his hold around Naruto's neck. Lifting him up with one, he bent down and began to picking up by her hair, and began to lift them up and bring them towards the ring of fire. You can both burn in hell for all I care," growled Hazel as Naruto was trying to break himself free from the man's grip, as Yang began to slash wildly at Hazel before undoing his shirt to reveal his stash of syringe filled with his need and will to his strength. Seeing this as her chance to turn the tables around, Yang went and cut herself free by snipping a small portion of her hair that Hazel had on her before she fell on her ass. "All right, you asshole, you're about to pay the ultimate price for forcing me to cut my hair," said Yang as Hazel looked down at her and the small clump he had on hand, before he effortlessly tossed Naruto aside as he nearly rolled into the ring of fire as he grabbed onto the railing on time as he finally looked down to see how and why the place got its name. Below him was industrial-sized generators that were improvised out of scraps and whatnot that literally set them all on fire. As the fire burns high and with higher still, as Naruto began to climb his way up, Yang charged forward ready to stab Hazel in the heart, but the man merely had to deliver straight a punch to her face before knocking Yang down and disarming her. Getting over on her, Hazel began to wrap his hands over Yang's neck, ready to strangle her from there. But Naruto got back up in time and threw himself on top of Hazel, where he tried to chokehold him, but instead played an awkward game of rodeo, resulting in him sending his chems flying and a few landing on top of Yang. Grabbing two of the syringes, Yang removed the cap of both of them and stabbed them in Hazel's chest before injecting the contents just as he got Naruto off his back. Within seconds, Hazel was brought to his knees as his heart was racing way faster than he could handle, as his eyes were bloodshot and his feeling and control of anything was starting to fear, except for his racing heart, causing him to panic more. "Gah!" screamed Hazel as he wanted to end his feelingless feeling and seize the fear that controlled his heart, as he began to grip onto his chest and started to move around aimlessly until he wound up falling to his own death within the ring of fire itself. "You alright?" asked Yang as she offered her hand to Naruto. "Yeah, I'm good. You?" asked Naruto as he took her hand and got back on her feet. "I could be better, but at least my headache is gone," smiled Yang. "Right, let's leave then," said Naruto as they exited where Hazel had entered. Unknown to them, only one other person remained vigilant as he was watching everything that was happening through the monitors. "Never thought I'd see the day where the ring of fire won't burn anymore," said Kabuto as he leaned back on his chair, as but only a few feet away from him was Yang's prosthetic hand. A shame too, given how this was one of the last few pre-war technologies ever calibrated with the legendary organic mechanic and prosthetic blacksmith, said Kabuto as he had no use for it. "Oh well, might as well give it back and then some," said Kabuto as he was in the Ring of Fire's main treasure room that contained pristine pre-war weapons and technology long forgotten and damaged. "Yeah, and then some," said Kabuto as he began to pick up a duffel bag and filled it with a little bit of everything, since today marks the end of the Ring of Fire. End of chapter 10.